We wish we had better news for you, but we unfortunately told you exactly where we would be sitting starting today's program. At a unfortunate 40-year plus high on many measurable inflation data, September did not get any better for the Biden administration. Inflation rose 8.2% in September. That is the big number, but the core inflation rate was up 6.6%. That is a 40-year high going all the way back to August of 1982. So, the Inflation Reduction Act, which actually increases inflation, has not in any way made things any better. And stop if you've heard this before. Everybody out there said, wow, this inflation is even worse than we expected. Let me play you a couple of cuts as this number came down at 8:30 a.m. this morning. Let's start with Fox Business's Cheryl Casone. Here's what she said.
So we're looking at a month-over-month gain of 0.4%. The estimate was 0.2%. Month-over-month coming in at 0.4%. Year-over-year, 8.2%. That is hotter than expected.
Let me contextualize this with a couple of more cuts from a variety of media sources. CNBC's Steve Leisman says, you can't even say that inflation has peaked yet.
Everything the Fed, look, they have been medium term to long term wrong.
Yeah.
Short term, they've been right when they've been coming forward. And you had Mester, who took a little heat the other day, saying you can't even say inflation has peaked yet. Well, you can't even say inflation has peaked yet, at least in these numbers. We can argue about whether or not the Fed's watching the right numbers.
And then finally, CNN's Christine Romans. This is the one I want to hit you with. Highest since August of 1982. 40-year highs. Listen to this.
The Fed has been raising interest rates now for months, and these numbers are still near 40-year highs. And when you dig inside these numbers, and this is what everyone's really paying close attention to this morning, Bianna, when you strip out food and energy, that core inflation, annual core inflation, 6.6%, that is the highest since 1982. So that is a fresh 40-year high for core inflation, and month-over-month core inflation, 0.6%. That matches what we saw in August. Overall inflation, you can see on a line chart how it's off the worst levels that we'd seen earlier this year, maybe showing signs of turning or peaking. That's what everybody wants to know.
Okay, so Buck, it ain't good.
I mean, first of all, the fact that there's this worse than expected. It has been worse than expected pretty much every month for the last 8 months or so.
I mean, it feels like
every month it feels like they're like, oh, it's worse than expected. Here's something that's very important, I think, for everyone to keep in mind here. Joe Biden, what was it, a day or two ago, was speaking to Tapper over at CNN, that interview, and he says, oh, look at the people that are saying we're going to have a recession. They've been saying it and saying it. Put that aside for a second. Look at the people who have been saying since the beginning of the Biden administration, we are going to have really bad inflation if you don't stop spending like lunatics. And that is what we have. So We've been right on this. When you think about how the Tea Party came to prominence or came to be in 2009 because of the Obama administration spending basically $800 billion, $900 billion in stimulus, Biden came into office and was like, $2 trillion. Just let's do it. $1.9 trillion. I mean, right off the bat, not a single Republican vote. And then they did the Inflation Reduction Act, which, does anyone actually think that's reducing inflation? Of course not. They want to separate the cause and effect here because we've been telling them, the other side, the Republicans have been saying, you're spending too much money. The government is putting too much currency into circulation. You've got to stop. And now we were right and they were wrong. There's this pattern. Hey, if you undermine cops and you have progressive prosecutors, you're going to have lawless, crazy streets and a lot of crime and violence. That is what has happened. Hey, if you make it really easy for people to come into this country and you don't do any interior enforcement of illegal immigration, you're going to get even more illegal immigration. That is what happened. And with inflation, we've been telling them exactly what is going to happen, Clay. And here we are, and the American people are presented with this. And Democrats have no real answer other than it's not that bad. Look at how low unemployment is right now. We're not going into recession. You and I have been saying inflation is going to be really bad. We were right. we've also been saying we're heading into a bad recession. Who wants to place bets on the guys who have been right on that versus the guys who were wrong, as in the Biden regime, on inflation and recession?
So we played all those cuts coming out at 8:30 a.m. Eastern. I wanted to do that because Democrats knew, even though they publicly are arguing otherwise, that these numbers were likely to be really bad. And the significance here is this is really the last economic data that is going to come out before the midterms. We're sitting at 26 days out. A lot of you are already able to vote through early voting, or you're voting through absentees or whatever it may be. A lot of you have already cast your ballots, and everybody out there should go vote. But this basically bakes in. There's no argument the Biden administration can make now that they have inflation in any way under control. And a couple of things that are significant. One, there's $1 online source where you can bet on elections in the United States. It's called the Predicted Markets. You guys can look it up. I like to watch all of the offshore, all of the overseas, but in this United States market, for the first time in months, Republicans are now favored to take the Senate. So things are all breaking in a very positive direction for Republicans. On top of that, look at what they did. This is at least the second time, Buck, that the January 6th committee has scheduled a hearing on the day that inflation is coming out.
Oh, Clay, what do you mean? I'm coming over to your place. I got the popcorn ready. We're going to watch the January 6th hearing. It's going to be amazing.
But if we had a real media, when they are talking to all of these committee chairs that are involved in January 6th, they would say, wait a moment, you canceled the hearing a couple of weeks ago because there was a hurricane, and you intentionally chose this date on the calendar for at least the second time when inflation numbers were going to be coming out. My point is, they are trying to run from inflation and basically pull a pivot and say, oh, yeah, inflation's 40-year highs. It's really bad. It's not getting any better. But look at what happened back on January 6th. Those awful Trump Republicans, the MAGAs, they're trying to destroy the country. Let me tell you something. Inflation at 40-year highs is more of a threat to American democracy than anything that happened on January 6th, not to mention it's a direct attack every single time you pull your wallet out.
If you want to really mess up, immiserate, and even, in its most extreme form, destroy a country, debasing and ultimately destroying its currency is one of the most effective ways to do it. I'm not saying that we're at that point, but we've been pushing the limits here, and people are feeling the pain from it, and Democrats won't stop. They can look what they just did. Democrats in the House all voted for, Build Back Better. Democrats in the House voted for the Inflation Reduction Act, and same thing with basically all of the Democrat senators. So, Joe Manchin too, but he just voted for the lesser version of Build Back Better. And so we sit here and we say, does this all matter to people or not? I mean, this is really the question going into the election. Do you want the failures of the Biden administration, which are obvious now? There really isn't. I think it's so important that we always, bring out what the argument of the other side is with these things, right? I mean, sometimes, as we know, it's, the right is racist, and that actually is their argument. They won't really argue that on inflation. They'll argue that on a whole lot of other things, and that's a bad faith argument. But on this, they really don't have one. I mean, they're effectively just saying, trust us, as in the Biden regime. We know what's best for you. We'll get you through this. There's more work to do. You hear that line from them all the time. No, you guys suck at this. This has been really bad. This has been a disaster, and you need adults who can actually read a balance sheet or at least do basic math to be making more of these decisions.
Things would be far better if Joe Biden had done nothing.
Yes.
Right.
Gridlock would be amazing.
What's the number one rule of doctors? First, do no harm. Joe Biden has done a great deal of harm. And remember, Buck, as much as he spent, the trillions of dollars he spent on all Democrat votes since he came in, he wanted to spend over $5 trillion on Build Back Better. Like, that was the initial asking price that they put out there. And eventually, I don't trust that it's going to only cost $800 billion, but I think that was the final cost of whatever the Build Back bill ended up being called. The Inflation Reduction Act, I guess, is what they eventually ended up calling that thing. And remember, Buck, it was only, like 2 months ago with a stroke of a pen, he spent another $400 billion plus trying to eradicate student loans, which is going to end up in a court proceeding probably for years.
And that's inflationary
as
well.
That's
inflationary. I mean, Clay, Biden, as we all know, is effectively a cognitively challenged puppet of the hard left in this White House. That's what's actually going on. Now, they haven't been able to get full Bernie Sanders policies through because there are Democrats that are in vulnerable states that want to keep their jobs. So they've got to toe that line between letting people know who they really are and letting people letting the left get its way. But Biden is by no means fiscally, when it comes to economics, a moderate, a sound, steady hand. I mean, I also think that he clearly lacks, and many of the advisors around him lack the understanding and judgment necessary to be able to push for worthwhile ideas that would create growth and prosperity. I mean, this is a mess. It's the number one issue. Everyone knows we're heading into a recession. The country's in a bad mood right now. And the country should be in a bad mood right now because we've got idiots in charge.
We've got the worst economic environment in many of our lives and the most ill-suited knowledge of economic leadership that we've probably ever had in the White House. That's not a good combination.
Yeah, and they keep pointing to Trump, as you say, January 6 hearings today. It is pathetic. It is so transparent that they must know that. But Clay, to the earlier point, if they had a good argument for what they've done with spending and how it hasn't led to inflation, we would tell you they did this. Biden did. You know those little stickers? That's why they were so brilliant. Little stickers with Biden and the gas prices.
Yeah.
There should be those little stickers, but they should be on every website looking at the inflation, the CPI index, and by the way, mortgage rates are the highest they've been in 20 years.
Yeah, we've got audio on mortgage rates, and I know a lot of people out there, you've been looking, Buck,
let's
buying
talk mortgages.
Getting married.
It's rough out there in mortgage land.
Yeah,
right
we'll tell you how rough it is if you have not bought a home. And again, I think the big part about mortgages is not just buying homes, it's how many people won't leave their homes now if they happen to have a good mortgage rate because of how much more they're going to have to pay to borrow to move somewhere else. And all this ties in with the economic collapse, unfortunately, of the Biden administration.
Here's maybe the headline of the day. Interest rates, well, they're going straight up. Will you look at that? The yield on the 10-year Treasury, 4.04%. It can't be long before you get 7% plus mortgages. And the 2-year, good Lord, 4.48%. When I say interest rates went straight up, I mean it. That's what inflation does to you. Energy price inflation, well, that's still with us. Look at diesel, up another 2 cents overnight to an average of $5.18. It is up 30 cents in a week. No change for gasoline. $3.91 is your average there. California, still well above $6 a gallon. Ironically, the president is in California right now, touting his Inflation Reduction Act. Oh, boy. Bad timing. Got to say that. 8% inflation just reported. $7 gas in Los Angeles, where he will be today, raising a lot of money from Hollywood.
Stuart Varney's right. You're going to see 7% plus mortgages regularly soon here. It's going to be pretty standard. Might even go above that, as you remember back in the 80s. What did it get to, like 15%, 16%?
Over that, I think. Yeah,
it got crazy.
Because they were trying to kill inflation under Jimmy Carter. And unfortunately, Buck, I really do think there's a huge number of people out there who may have gotten 2.5% or 3% mortgages, and maybe you're having a new baby. Maybe you are wanting to move to a new school district, or maybe your kids have left the house and you're thinking about downsizing. And you're simultaneously also saying, I can't justify leaving my house because of my 2.5% or 3% mortgage rate.
It's really easy now. There actually are some great sites where you can just go and really plug in the numbers.
Because you've been looking. You're getting married. You've been looking at what housing costs and everything.
We're going to rent for a little while. For a little while.
But, I mean, you're actually experiencing it like I bet a lot of our listeners are.
But, I mean, I've gone through this also with some investment properties that I own. And you can plug in the numbers. And if you were thinking about buying a $400,000 house, a $500,000 house, something like that, Now you're looking at buying a $250,000 house. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just if you're going to finance it, just because of the difference in monthly overhead costs that you're going to be running. It's really substantial, which also goes to your point about how does this affect people's decisions to expand or buy a house or move. All these things result in indicators for a recession, I think. I mean, you add this all together, and you're going to have some economic pain ahead. I think it's interesting. First of all, Biden's in California. Is he going to swing by Oregon? Because he might need to. And I know we got Christine Drazen on later today. She's running for governor of Oregon. Politico has a headline. I'm trying to remember what the exact headline is. I don't want to get it wrong. But basically, yeah, Oregon is in jeopardy. That's the headline, because they know Oregon could actually have its first Republican governor in 40 years. But Biden, Clay, is out there in California raising money from people who are so rich that they don't care about inflation, who are going to tell people who are getting crushed by inflation, Donald Trump, January 6th. That's the whole game.
And look, I'm just scrolling through Twitter, and the usual suspects, what do you think they're doing? They're talking about January 6th. If you work at CNN right now, you are pivoting off 40-year high inflation this morning to carry the water about January 6th for whatever claptrap they're going to put out today, trying to distract from the failures of the Biden administration. Because everything Joe Biden has touched is worse. I mean, it's an easy question. But are you better off or not than you were 2 years ago? Almost no one is better off. Buck, I saw this morning the NASDAQ is down like 32% right now. $12.5 trillion in stock market value wiped out under Joe Biden.